This is episode W, Weaving Community Through Writing, with Stephen Klopfenstein. This is A is for Adversity, a podcast about navigating the obstacles in life. Thanks for joining us this season as we talk about how a community can help. I'm Jen.
And I'm Rachel. We're here to be a part of your community this year as we learn together.
Okay, I am here with Stephen. Would you mind introducing yourself to my audience?
Sure, I'm Stephen. I write under the name S.A. Klopfenstein, which is just my initials.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, and tell us how you got into writing or how you moved to Daybreak or just a little bit more about you.
Sure, yeah. So I've been writing. I started writing in college, and so I've been writing a really long time. And published my first book about 5 years ago or so, and it's actually like we actually had just gotten jobs to come out here, and I hit publish from a Starbucks in Park City as we were heading back to Wyoming, where we lived at the time, and we're just getting ready to deal with all of that. And so it published at a crazy time, and pretty much everything's been crazy since. So
Yeah. And did you self-publish or did you have an agent or how did that work?
yeah, so I did self-publish. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's fascinating. I've been writing a book off and on for about 5 years, and so hopefully get it published one of these days. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting to hear the process. So why are authors important to a community?
Yeah, I think authors are important largely just because stories are important. I think they've always you can look back to prehistoric times, and uh, stories were important then. They're still important now. I think they kind of uniquely allow us to see things from somebody else's perspective and like kind of get in someone else's head or a character's head. And I think they're pretty unique in that way. And so I think they help us see different perspectives. They entertain us. They bring us together in book clubs and fandoms, and when the movie adaptation comes out, and things like that. And so I think a lot of community forms around good stories, and they bring us a lot of joy and make us think.
Yeah, that's so true. I love that. And you primarily write fiction, correct?
I do, yeah.
Yeah,
I
fiction fantasy.
Yeah, all my books are sci-fi fantasy of some flavor.
Got it. Yeah. And so, how do you feel like you get your ideas? Do you feel like you get them from other authors or just your own like imagination or different places?
Yeah, definitely all over the place. Some of them are just straight out of my head. A lot, I think every writer is influenced by the books that they read, and so lots of my favorite fantasy authors, whether it's Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, or um, Game of Thrones, or Brandon Sanderson, or just anything that I read inspires me to some extent, because I'm always interested in what other writers are doing, how they're dealing with their characters, how they create, for fantasy authors, how they create worlds, and things like that. And so it's really all over the place. It's a lot of I'm really into the mountains and nature and outdoor activities, and so I think you can definitely see that in some of my books too, where especially in my fantasy series, the Shadow Watch, a lot of it takes place in the mountains and in kind of harshly beautiful settings. And so I think probably just my own love of the mountains and snow and things like that probably influenced that quite a bit.
Yeah, that's neat. I hadn't really considered that before, but that's a neat aspect. So, do you feel like you've gained a sense of community with other writers, or do you feel like you kind of go solo a lot, or how does that look like in that world?
Yeah, so for me personally, and I think for a lot of writers, it can feel like a really lonely endeavor because you're doing a lot. It's you and your keyboard, or there's a couple people who still write by hand, and it can feel really lonely. But I think there's a lot of power in community when you find it as a writer. And certainly for me, like as I've been doing this for quite a number of years, and even going back to when I first started writing in college, I think one of the biggest things that really helped it stick and brought me a lot of joy with just being creative in that way was I took a class, and it was really set up like a workshop to where a couple people would share a piece every class and everybody would read it and offer feedback. And so I really started writing in community in a lot of ways. And then now I have a writing group that I meet with just about every week, and they're fellow fantasy and uh kind of a mix of genre, but like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, basically. And that's been huge for everything that I've done since I joined them right at the beginning of the pandemic, because we were all like, well, we've got some time. So I found somebody who was looking to do a group, and so we started just meeting online. And I've met all of those guys in person now, and gone to conferences, and we chat constantly. And so a big thing that I'm shifting to now was really rooted in community too, which is I'm crowdfunding a special edition for my first fantasy book on Kickstarter. And I saw some other authors doing that, and a good friend of mine, one of the guys actually in my writing group, did one. And I've gotten into a community of a bunch of fantasy authors who are doing it, and it's been really cool because we share everything about our process. We share how we go about finding artists and other people to work with how to market and all those kind of things. And certainly for me, I've found a real kind of an attitude of everybody lifts each other up, and that's been really cool. And I don't think you find that everywhere, but within the author community, that's been my experience, that people really support one another and don't try to hoard all the secrets. Basically, that the idea is like, the more people that are reading, the better off everybody is, we think. And so I think the more that any community can kind of have that attitude, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. What came to mind as you were sharing that is just the power of collaboration and
Mm-hmm.
bouncing ideas off and just, like you said, supporting one another, and we all rise together. That's so great. So you mentioned conferences. That was another question I was going to ask is, do you go to workshops or things like that to, continue building as a writer, or,
Yeah.
meet other writers? What does that look like?
Yeah, I do. I don't do it as much as I would like to, just because a lot of times they're held across the country or things like that. And a lot of that stuff for a couple of years in the middle of my career kind of got shut down. And um, so yeah, I do. And some of it's online, some of it's in person. But I love to do that. I've gained a lot every time that I've gone, just a lot just from networking in a lot of ways, and a lot of from just people sharing in sessions or whatever it is. But it's been a very enriching experience every time. And so I'm hoping to continue to do it as often as I can fit into my schedule.
Yeah, that's great. I wonder, have you ever considered holding some sort of like writing workshop where you give advice to people that would like to write a book or are curious about how to write their stories? I'm always interested in events, so it's neat to have people that have different talents that I can bring to different events and things like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely would be. I've done that at a very small scale, like talking to students or things like that, and offering some insight to that. So I love talking to anybody who's trying to write or thinking about writing or things like that. And I don't know everything, but I've learned a ton over more than a decade of trying to trying to figure it out and turn it into something that people love and keep coming back for more books for. So
Yeah, that's great. And I always look to people that are ahead of me, and just how they've overcome stumbling blocks or different things. What type of adversity or challenges would you say you've encountered?
definitely plenty.
Yes.
It's writing's a tough thing. Just one of the earliest things was just figuring out how to finish a book.
Yeah.
which the first book that I wrote, which I never ended up publishing, I spent several years writing and learned a ton. If I could go back, I would have done it a lot differently, because the second book that I wrote in like 7 months or something like that. And
Mm.
I don't think I could have done it that fast, had I not already spent years troubleshooting one book and realizing, wow, I I should have I should have gotten it done and figured out what I could do with it, rather than I kept going back and restarting, and so
Mm.
that ended up in the end being, I probably could have saved a lot of time if I would have finished what I was doing and then tried to fix it later. And that's something I advise anybody who's trying to write, is just finish what you're working on, get a draft done, and as soon as you have a draft to work with, you you can make it better, or you can realize sooner that maybe you need to just move on to the next project. But
Yeah.
so that was an early thing, and probably more recently it's been um just learning to get really intentional with my time to fit it in, because I
Mm.
think there's lots of people who think about writing a book and dream about writing a book, and the percentage of people who actually do it is way, way smaller, because it's hard and it's really hard to find consistent time. And I've certainly found that if I write every day, even if it's just a little bit, I long term I can write a book in way shorter time, because it adds up, and you kind of carry momentum day to day, even if you just wrote a paragraph one day. If you take weeks off or things like that, it's really hard, because you kind of have to jump back into the mentality of the book and the characters and the world that you're creating, in my case with fantasy worlds. And so that becomes challenging when you don't do it consistently. And so kind of juggling the need to do it regularly with being a husband and a dad, and working other jobs and things like that, especially since having kids, has proven to be a big challenge. But I think it's made me a lot more effective in the time that I do have, because I've just kind of been forced um, to really zero in on that time and use it well, and not get distracted by my phone or whatever else, and just use the time well. So that's been
Yeah.
a more recent struggle that I'm constantly overcoming, I think. But
Yeah. Well, that's great. I love how you uh, pointed it out that if you're writing every day, it kind of strengthens that muscle, or it keeps you in the habit, or, it keeps it on the forefront of your mind. So, what is a favorite inspirational quote of yours?
sure. So I had to think a little bit about this, because there's lots of different ones, and I went for one that kind of speaks to me more recently, with having two boys and reading books to them, and hoping that they'll have a love of books and stories as well. And so this is a quote by one of my favorite writers, Neil Gaiman, on the importance of reading to your kids. So he said, "We have an obligation to read aloud to our children, to read them things they enjoy, to read them stories we're already tired of, to do the voices, to make it interesting, and not stop reading to them just because they learn to read themselves. To use reading aloud time as bonding time, as time when no phones are being checked, when the distractions of the world are put aside."
Hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. That is so needed and such a good reminder because, yeah, I know that that impacts them a lot. If you read to them younger, then they'll like it as they get older. So that's so true. So tell us about your books a little bit and how people can find you and get in touch with you.
Sure. So I've written 7 books at this point,
Mhm.
written and published 7 books anyway. And they fall into 2 series. I'm just about to release the last book in my second series. And I kind of decided to do everything at once right now. So I've got things going with both series. So my first series is the Shadow Watch Saga. It's a epic fantasy, um, pretty similar in tone to the Shadow and Bone Netflix series, for people who are familiar with that. Um, and is essentially about a revolution of magic. It's set in a world where magic's forbidden, and it's ruled by a pretty cruel empire, and people who can use magic are hunted down and seen as a threat. And so it's essentially a revolution
Hmm.
book, and a lot of characters who find family with one another. A lot of them have lost family and things like that, and so they find a strong bond with people like them who can use magic as they get into this revolution.
Yeah.
And
Great.
so yeah, so that was my first series that I wrapped that up a couple of years ago, and actually here in about a little less than a week, we're launching a special illustrated edition of it on Kickstarter for the first book, and we're throwing a party at Biscott's here in Daybreak, and pretty excited for that. Going to do a book signing and kind of celebrate that series and introduce it to people who've never heard of it who come and things like that. So we're really excited for that.
Yeah, and if people want to donate, how do you find the information on Kickstarter? Do you type in the title of the book or you?
Yeah, you could search for the Shadow Watch or S.A. Klopfenstein and it'll come up. Um, and then yeah, if you find me on social media, you could also find it very easily because I'm posting a lot of stuff about it right now.
Okay, sounds good. And then tell us about your other series.
Yeah, so the other series is called Pantheon Online. It's in a sci-fi fantasy genre called lit RPG, which is essentially like a kind of like Ready Player One,
Mm,
where mixed with it's kind of like Ready Player One meets D&D. And so
got
um,
it.
it's set up as a role playing game. Sometime in my particular one, it's kind of like uh, a little bit of a mix of the Matrix and the game Assassin's Creed, and so it has lots
Mm,
of assassins and rogues running around, and a character who's kind of thrust into this game world forcibly and is trying to escape. And it's set in the future where people can basically upload their consciousness into a virtual world and then play it out. And so it's a lot of fun. It's more action packed, more a little more lighthearted than my other series. It's got a lot of humor thrown in there and things like that. And so a little bit different, but if you like fantasy stuff, it meets a lot of the same criteria. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing about those. Um, and I just wanted to say too that I just admire you following your passion and just living life as a writer because as I've found my niche more and more, it's helping moms maintain their identity. And you spoke to that too, just maintaining your identity as a father and a husband. So, uh, yeah, just props for dedicating that time to something that you love. And I know that when we like really lean into what we love, that's how we can, inspire others or just, make a difference or even just enjoy life more fully. So,
yeah, absolutely. Life's too short to not pursue things you really want to go for. So
yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for talking with us. Was there anything you wanted to share?
uh no, I don't think so. Definitely anybody who's local, I'd love to meet you, and feel free to swing by Biscott's on November 4th, around 10 a.m. to noon is what we're planning for.
Yeah.
And so would love to see you there, but otherwise, yeah, I think that's about it. So
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for your time and for sharing your thoughts about writing with us. That's great.
yeah, absolutely
Okay.
glad to be here.
Yeah.